I never imagined that my quiet life on the farm would turn into a battlefield. The farm was my sanctuary, a place I'd inherited from my grandparents, tucked away on the edge of a suburban neighborhood governed by a strict homeowners association. I had lived there peacefully for years, tending to my crops, raising a few animals, and enjoying the silence that only open land can provide. But then came the trip I had to take. It was just a few weeks, maybe a month, I thought, to visit family across the state. I made sure everything on the farm was in order before I left. The gates were locked, the fields looked good, and the old farmhouse was secure. Little did I know that during my absence, the HOA had taken matters into their own hands, literally building a hotel on my farm. When I returned, the first thing that caught my eye was the giant construction site right where my cornfield had been. The familiar rows of green were gone, replaced by the skeleton of a large building framed with steel beams and piles of concrete blocks. My heart sank. I went straight to the site where a few workers were hauling materials. I demanded to know what was going on, and they pointed toward a nearby sign posted by the HOA. It was a permit for hotel construction, approved by Westlake HOA Board. I stood frozen. No one had told me anything. No permission had been sought. No notice posted on my property. Nothing. Determined to find answers, I reached out to the HOA board, only to be met with cold stares and dismissive answers. They claimed it was community development and that the land had been designated for commercial use by the neighborhood plan, something I never agreed to. That's when I realized I was in for a fight. But I wasn't going to be the victim. I knew my rights, and I had a plan. A legal trap they wouldn't see coming. The first step was to gather every document I had related to my farm: deeds, zoning maps, property tax records, and correspondence with the HOA. I studied the HOA bylaws closely, looking for loopholes or violations. The HOA had made critical errors, approving construction without my consent, ignoring zoning restrictions, and bypassing county regulations. Next, I hired a lawyer who specialized in property law and HOA disputes. Together, we crafted a case that would not only halt construction, but also expose the HOA's overreach and negligence. As I prepared my legal battle, tensions escalated. The HOA board tried to intimidate me with threats and even trespassed onto my land. But I stayed calm and documented everything: photos, videos, witness statements. My legal trap was closing. The day came when I confronted the HOA in court. The judge listened as my lawyer presented overwhelming evidence: unauthorized construction, violations of property rights, and the HOA's failure to follow legal procedures. The board members squirmed under scrutiny. Finally, the judge ruled in my favor. The hotel construction was stopped immediately, and the HOA was ordered to restore my farm to its original state. Penalties were imposed for their unlawful actions. It was a hard-fought victory, but it was mine. My farm was saved, and the HOA learned that you can't just take what isn't yours. This story isn't just about land or legal battles. It's about standing up for what's right, protecting your home, and showing that sometimes the quietest people have the strongest resolve. The days after my return were a whirlwind of emotions: shock, anger, disbelief. How could the HOA board have done this? The audacity to build a hotel on my farm without so much as a call or a letter was beyond outrageous. I'd always known the HOA was strict, but this was outright theft in plain sight. I started by walking the entire property, taking in every detail. The hotel's construction site was a mess of heavy machinery, scaffolding, and workers. The noise, the dust, it was like a nightmare invading my peaceful refuge. My crops were crushed under the bulldozers, my fences knocked down, and my farm animals were nowhere to be found. I immediately called the county zoning office to confirm what I had suspected. My land was zoned agricultural and residential, not commercial. No permits should have been issued for a hotel. The county confirmed that no such permits had come through their office. That was my first legal win. The HOA had no right to issue construction permits. They weren't a governmental body. They were a private association with authority limited to enforcing community guidelines, not overriding zoning laws. Armed with this knowledge, I contacted a property lawyer, Sarah Mitchell, who had a reputation for taking on big cases against overreaching HOAs. Sarah listened carefully and agreed to take my case. Her first step was to file a formal complaint against the HOA for trespassing and illegal construction. We demanded an immediate cease and desist order to halt the building. The HOA board, however, didn't back down. Instead, they sent me a letter claiming I was disrupting community progress and warned of legal consequences if I interfered. It was clear they thought they could intimidate me, but I was ready. Sarah and I had a plan. We knew the HOA's bylaws inside and out, and we discovered that they had failed to notify me properly, violated their own rules for property development approvals, and ignored mandatory community votes. I started documenting everything. I took photos of the damage, recorded conversations, and gathered testimonies from neighbors who had noticed the suspicious activity while I was away but were too scared to speak up. The turning point came when Sarah and I uncovered that the HOA had forged signatures on a petition to approve the hotel construction. This was not just overreach, it was fraud. I felt a surge of hope. The HOA had walked right into my legal trap, and there was no way out. Meanwhile, tensions in the neighborhood were rising. Some homeowners were divided. Some supported the HOA, hoping the hotel would boost property values. Others were uneasy about the reckless actions. I held community meetings, shared the truth about the HOA's misconduct, and rallied support. It wasn't just my fight anymore. It was about protecting everyone's rights. When we filed the lawsuit, the HOA scrambled. Their lawyers tried to discredit me, claiming I was being selfish and obstructing progress. But the evidence was stacked against them. As the case moved forward, I remained calm but vigilant. Every hearing was a step closer to justice. In the end, the judge ruled decisively. The hotel construction was illegal, the permits void, and the HOA was ordered to restore my farm immediately. The HOA members faced hefty fines and were publicly reprimanded. My farm was safe again. But more than that, I had sent a clear message. You can't mess with someone's home without consequences. The days after the court's decision were a whirlwind of relief and relentless work. The judge's order was clear. The HOA had to stop construction immediately and restore my farm to its original condition. But just because the law was on my side didn't mean they would comply without resistance. Within hours, I was back on my farm, surveying the damage. The once lush fields were scarred with tire tracks from bulldozers, the fences I'd built were splintered, and the foundation of the hotel, partially poured concrete, stood like a jagged wound in the earth. It was hard to see the land I loved so much in such a state. I called in a team of restoration experts and began working with local authorities to ensure the HOA followed the court order. The county building inspectors visited the site several times, documenting every violation and monitoring the rollback of the hotel construction. Meanwhile, the HOA board wasn't giving up quietly. They pushed back with appeals and attempted to sway neighbors to their side with promises of economic growth and jobs from the hotel. Flyers appeared in mailboxes praising the HOA's vision for progress, but their words rang hollow to those who had seen the destruction firsthand. I continued holding meetings with community members, keeping everyone informed and united. Many neighbors shared stories of small grievances with the HOA, arbitrary fines, overbearing rules, and a general lack of transparency. My fight had uncovered a deeper rot beneath the surface. One afternoon, Sarah and I uncovered an even bigger scandal. The HOA's president had been embezzling funds meant for community maintenance. It was a shocking betrayal of trust that added fuel to our cause. The local newspaper caught wind of the story, and suddenly, our battle was front-page news. Public pressure mounted, and the HOA board faced investigations not only for the illegal hotel, but also for financial misconduct. Despite their attempts to resist, the HOA had no choice but to start dismantling the hotel structure. Day by day, the construction equipment disappeared, and the land began to heal. Walking through the farm, I reflected on the fight. It had been exhausting, painful, and sometimes terrifying. But I had stood my ground, not just for myself, but for every person whose home and rights had been trampled. The legal trap I set had worked, but more importantly, it showed the power of knowledge, preparation, and community. The farm would grow again. The hotel was gone, but the story of what happened here would stay. A testament to standing up for what's right when the odds seem stacked against you. With the hotel construction halted and demolition underway, the sense of victory was tempered by the ongoing battle to hold the HOA accountable. It wasn't just about reclaiming my farm anymore, it was about justice and ensuring the HOA couldn't harm anyone else in the neighborhood. The legal fight dragged on longer than I'd hoped. The HOA's lawyers filed appeal after appeal, trying to delay the process. At one point, they even attempted to countersue me, accusing me of harassment and interference with community projects. But Sarah and I were prepared. We filed motions to dismiss their claims and gathered more evidence exposing their fraudulent activities. Our momentum kept growing as more neighbors joined our cause, sharing their own stories of HOA abuse. The county took action against the HOA board, launching a full investigation into their conduct. Several members resigned under pressure, and a few faced criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud. The community came together like never before. We organized meetings to draft a new, transparent HOA charter with strict rules to prevent future abuses. I was elected to the committee tasked with overseeing the transition. Amid the chaos, I poured my heart back into restoring the farm. We replanted the fields, repaired fences, and rebuilt the pond's banks. Slowly, the land began to breathe again. There were moments of doubt, nights when exhaustion and frustration weighed heavy, but every call of a bird, every sprout of new grass reminded me why I fought. One afternoon, while walking along the edge of the property, I noticed something remarkable. The old oak tree my grandfather had planted years ago was still standing strong, its roots deep and resilient. It was a symbol of endurance, much like my own journey. The HOA's defeat became a local legend. People spoke of how one determined farm owner took on a powerful association and won. I realized that fighting back wasn't just about winning a legal battle. It was about protecting the very essence of home and community. The hotel was gone, but the scars it left inspired change. Together, we rebuilt not only the farm, but the trust and respect that had been broken. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. As the months passed, the dust settled, both on the farm and in the community. The HOA that once wielded unchecked power had been dismantled and reformed. The new board operated with transparency, accountability, and a genuine commitment to serving the neighborhood. I stayed involved, helping to ensure no one could abuse their authority like before. Meanwhile, my farm began to flourish again. The soil, rich and forgiving, responded well to the tender care. Green shoots pushed through the earth where the hotel had once stood. Bees returned to the wildflowers, and birds nested in the trees once more. It was as if the land was healing from the trauma it had endured. One spring morning, as I walked through the orchard, I thought back to the moment I first saw the hotel rising where my crop should have been. The rage and disbelief I'd felt had been replaced with a deep sense of pride. I had taken a stand not only for my property, but for justice. The legal battles had been grueling, and the cost was high, not just in money, but in time, energy, and trust. Yet they had taught me something invaluable. Knowledge is power, and preparation can turn the tide. I began sharing my story publicly, speaking at community events and legal seminars to warn others about the dangers of overreaching HOAs and the importance of understanding property rights. My fight became a beacon for those feeling powerless against big organizations. But beyond the courtroom victories and community reforms, the real win was personal. The farm was my home, my heritage, and my peace. Reclaiming it meant reclaiming a part of myself. The farm wasn't just a piece of land, it was a living legacy, one that I vowed to protect for generations to come. And as the sun set over the rolling fields, casting golden light over the restored farm, I knew this chapter had closed, but the story of standing up, fighting back, and winning would live on. With the farm back in my hands and the HOA reformed, I finally had space to breathe again. But the experience had left me changed. I wasn't just a farm owner anymore. I was a fighter, a guardian of my land and community. In the weeks that followed, I worked to restore not only the physical landscape, but the trust among neighbors. We started a neighborhood newsletter to keep everyone informed about upcoming meetings and community decisions. Transparency became our rallying cry. I also set up workshops about property rights and HOA regulations, inviting legal experts like Sarah to help educate residents. The goal was clear. No one else should be blindsided the way I was. People started calling me when they had issues with the HOA or needed advice. It felt good to give back, to turn my ordeal into something positive. The farm thrived in its new chapter. I planted heirloom seeds passed down from my grandparents, grew organic vegetables, and started a small farmers market that brought neighbors together. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the twilight, I reflected on everything. The battle with the HOA had been tough, but it reminded me what home really meant, a place worth fighting for. And fight I did, not just with lawyers and court orders, but with patience, community, and unwavering resolve. The hotel might have been built on my farm while I was gone, but it was my legal trap that caught the HOA, and in the end, justice prevailed. My farm was mine again, and it would stay that way. Life settled into a new rhythm, but the scars of the ordeal lingered. The hotel's brief existence on my farm had changed everything, not just the land, but the neighborhood's sense of trust and security. People were more aware now, more cautious about who held power and how it was wielded. I continued to be a voice for those who felt marginalized by the HOA system. We worked together to create stronger community policies that prioritize transparency and homeowner rights. Meanwhile, I expanded the farm's activities. With neighbors' support, we hosted seasonal festivals, farm-to-table dinners, and educational tours. What was once a private sanctuary had become a community hub, bridging gaps and healing divisions. But the biggest change was within me. The fight had forged resilience and confidence. I no longer felt like a quiet farmer tucked away from the world. I was a protector of heritage, a symbol of perseverance. One day, Sarah and I sat on the porch, sipping lemonade as the sun dipped low. "You did good," she said with a smile. "You stood up not just for yourself, but for everyone who calls this place home." I nodded, feeling the truth in her words. The farm was more than soil and trees. It was a testament to standing firm, no matter the odds. Years passed, and the story of the hotel that never was became part of local legend. Visitors would stop by the farm, curious about the fight that saved the land. I welcomed them with open arms, sharing not just my story, but lessons about courage, rights, and community. The farm flourished more than ever. The crops thrived, the animals roamed freely, and the orchard blossomed under my care. It was a living, breathing victory. Looking back, the ordeal with the HOA was a harsh but invaluable lesson. It taught me that home is something worth defending fiercely, that even the quietest voices can be loud when united by justice. And so the farm stood, rooted in the past, thriving in the present, and ready to face whatever the future might bring. Because some battles aren't just about land or buildings, they're about the heart, and my heart would always belong to this farm. The seasons changed, and with them, so did the energy on the farm. By now, the remnants of the hotel were nothing more than a memory. Where the concrete had once been poured, wildflowers now bloomed. Bright yellows, purples, and reds swaying in the breeze like nature's apology for what had been done. I started journaling more, documenting every step of the journey, the legal documents, court rulings, and personal reflections. What started as a means of therapy slowly turned into the foundation of a book. Friends and neighbors encouraged me to write it, and Sarah even connected me with a small publisher interested in stories of land rights and homeowner justice. I titled the manuscript, "They Built a Hotel on My Farm, but They Walked into My Legal Trap." The title alone sparked curiosity, but it was the content, raw, honest, and filled with grit, that struck a chord with readers. Within a year, the book became a regional bestseller. I was invited to speak at town halls, farmers' cooperatives, even at a real estate conference in Atlanta. People from across the country reached out with their own horror stories. Land taken without consent, HOAs gone rogue, neighbors pushed out by greed. My story gave them courage, but with the attention came something unexpected. An offer from a documentary filmmaker. He said, "Your story isn't just inspiring, it's eye-opening. We want to show how one person changed the system." Cameras soon rolled through my quiet town, capturing interviews, old court documents, drone footage of the once contested farmland. At first, I was hesitant. I wasn't interested in fame, but then I remembered why I fought: to protect and to educate. If putting my story on screen helped even one other person take back what was theirs, it would be worth it. The documentary, titled Legal Roots: The Fight to Save a Farm, premiered at a small independent film festival in Austin. I didn't know what to expect when I walked into that dimly lit theater with rows of strangers and a heart pounding in my chest. But as the film played, as my voice narrated over images of the land and the courtroom, and as Sarah spoke about the legal intricacies, I saw people leaning forward in their seats. Some wiped tears when the footage showed the destroyed crops and crushed fence lines. Others nodded as I explained how the HOA had used intimidation and bureaucracy to try and erase my history. When the credits rolled, the room filled with applause. Not polite clapping, genuine standing ovation type applause. I was overwhelmed. After the showing, people approached me, not just to say congratulations, but to tell me their stories. One woman from Arizona had lost access to her land because her HOA decided to convert it into a private park. A veteran from Florida said his community fined him into foreclosure over a flagpole. This wasn't just my fight, it was a national epidemic. That night, something clicked in me. I realized that what started as a personal battle had grown into a mission. I wasn't just a farmer or even an author. I was now an advocate. When I returned home, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, looking out across the peaceful fields bathed in the gold of early morning. The same fields where concrete trucks once rumbled, now quiet, sacred again. The wind rustled through the trees, almost like the land itself was sighing in relief. But I knew this story wasn't over. The documentary had opened doors, but it also brought attention, both good and bad. The old HOA president, now disgraced and facing charges, had been lying low, but I'd heard whispers that he was trying to start a new development board under a different name. And when I found out he had his sights on another neighboring property, a struggling farm where the owners were behind on taxes, I knew I couldn't walk away. Not yet. The trap I'd set once had worked. But now it was time to help someone else build theirs. News traveled fast in small towns. By the end of the week, it was confirmed. The disgraced former HOA president, Richard Langston, had quietly purchased shares in a shell company that was now negotiating with the local council to revitalize the west side of town. That area included several family farms, including one run by the Thompsons, an elderly couple who had lived on their land for over 40 years. Their farm bordered mine to the west. I'd known them for years. Mr. Thompson had given me advice on irrigation when I was just starting out, but now they were behind on taxes, and Richard was offering them a deal that seemed like salvation but reeked of manipulation. I paid them a visit one afternoon. Mrs. Thompson poured us lemonade and handed me a folder full of paperwork. He said he'd pay off our back taxes and give us a small monthly stipend if we sign over a limited-use deed. We'd still live here, he says, but he wants full development rights. I flipped through the contract and frowned. This isn't a deal. This is a trap. The fine print allowed the company to rezone the land for commercial use, override local farming protections, and eventually force an eminent domain claim if necessary for community growth. I'd seen it before. It was the same trick they tried on me, only wrapped in sweeter language. "I can't fight another war," Mr. Thompson said with tired eyes. "I don't have it in me." "You won't be fighting alone," I told him. "I'll help you set your own legal trap." We went to work immediately. Sarah and I drafted a legal blockade around the Thompson farm. We documented the land's historical significance, applied for local landmark protections, and launched a community campaign to raise enough funds to cover their taxes. Donations poured in. People remembered what had happened to me and didn't want it to happen again. We also filed for a temporary injunction to block the zoning proposal that Richard's company had quietly submitted to the town council. I personally attended the next public meeting, standing before the microphone and laying out the entire scheme in front of the press and dozens of neighbors. "Once again, we're seeing a predator dressed up as a developer," I said. "This isn't revitalization. It's a hostile takeover masked as charity. Don't let it happen again." The room erupted in applause. The council voted unanimously to halt the zoning change pending investigation. The Thompsons cried when I told them their farm was safe. And Richard? He fled the meeting before it was over, red-faced and defeated once more. The wind had shifted. You could feel it in town meetings, in neighborhood conversations, and even in the soil underfoot. People weren't afraid anymore. Not of shady HOA deals, not of backdoor developers, and certainly not of Richard Langston. After the Thompsons' victory, the momentum was undeniable. Our community had transformed from passive bystanders to a unified front of homeowners, farmers, and local families. We weren't just defending property anymore. We were reclaiming power. I started receiving letters. Dozens at first, then hundreds. From other states, other towns, people who had read my book, seen the documentary, or heard about the fight on social media. Some were just thank you notes. Others were cries for help. People desperate for guidance, trying to protect their homes from the same kind of predatory schemes. So I created something I never imagined I would. A nonprofit legal aid organization called Land Watch USA. With Sarah as my legal director and a growing team of young lawyers and community organizers, we dedicated ourselves to helping people stand up to HOAs, zoning boards, and corporate developers. We hosted town hall tours. We built online legal toolkits. And most importantly, we gave people back the belief that they could fight and win. But even as I traveled and worked across states, I never lost touch with my roots. The farm remained my sanctuary. My mornings still began with feeding the chickens and checking the irrigation. My evenings still ended with watching the sun set over the fields. One quiet fall evening, I stood at the edge of the old plot where the hotel had once begun to rise, where concrete and steel had tried to erase my history. Now it was a flower field. A patch of it was filled with deep blue cornflowers and yellow daisies, planted in memory of every legal battle we had fought and won. Behind me, the barn buzzed with life. We were hosting a small harvest festival. Children ran through corn mazes, music played on a makeshift wooden stage, and neighbors laughed over cider and pie. And there, in the heart of it all, stood a sign made of reclaimed barnwood. They tried to build a hotel. We built a community instead. I smiled. The battle with the HOA had started as a nightmare, a violation of everything I held dear. But it led me down a path I never expected, a path where the trap I had set didn't just catch a corrupt board, it caught the attention of a nation ready to rise up, take back their land, and demand justice. In the end, I didn't just reclaim my farm, I helped spark a movement, and that, more than anything, was the legacy I was proud to leave behind.